All right, I'm pleased to introduce our presenter this morning. Anne Akim-Fenwa is a limited licensed psychologist registered with the state of Michigan. She has over 18 years of experience working in interdisciplinary settings with children, adults, and individuals with mental illness and developmental disabilities. Currently, she works as the clinical coordinator at the Children's Center in their Crisis Care Center. She has spent several years assessing individuals in diverse settings in crisis and creating plans of service or intervention. She presents intervention strategies for extremely challenging behaviors and situations. She's skilled in teaching ways to read and respond to nonverbal cues in order to avert a crisis. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Anne.
Thank you. Good morning. This is kind of odd for me. The lighting is so bright. So if I blink a lot, that's why. So I'm going to avoid looking at the light. Well, welcome. I'm happy to see a full room. I thought there were going to be like 5 or 6 people, and everybody else was going to be off-site. So I was begging people to come. Okay, this morning we're going to talk about crisis assessment and prevention. You've heard a little bit about my background. I feel privileged to have worked with a lot of diverse population, and I think a lot of my crisis background comes from working with individuals with developmental disabilities, which I did for almost 10 years. And I think when we do that in that environment, it makes it easier to kind of assess other individuals that can actually tell you what's going on with them. So when we go from reading nonverbal cues and assessing someone that's in crisis in that state, it makes it easier to be able to talk with someone and when they can tell you, yeah, this is what's going on with me. So that's some of the background I come in with. I should have asked how to move along on here. Just enter? Okay. All right, during this training, our objective that we're going to be working on is participants will learn ways of assessing a crisis. I'm sure we all have some background in doing that, so we're going to do a little bit more on that today. Understand ways to avoid escalating a crisis situation. As clinicians, we go in, we bring a lot of our stuff when we meet individuals that we work with, and we're going to talk about ways to kind of avoid escalating someone that's already in crisis. We'll describe the process of assessment and referral for screening within individual communities. So when you think about questions that you're going to ask me at the end of this presentation, think about ways that you guys refer individuals that present in crisis at your different facilities, and ways that you intervene, and then some of the policies and procedures within your individual agencies. So if you bring those questions up, we might be able to kind of process through it as well. Okay. So crisis defined, I'm sure if I ask everybody in this room how you would define a crisis, we'll all have different ways or different definitions of what crisis is. But the true assessment given by Roberts in 2005 says an acute disruption in psychological state of being in which one's usual coping mechanisms fail and there exists evidence of distress and functional impairment. So the main key is the distress and functional impairment. Because when you think about that, hey, if somebody is saying, I'm in crisis, but they're functioning okay, it's not presenting in behaviors, it's not presenting in any other forms. So they're sleeping okay, eating okay, but they're verbalizing that I don't feel right. I get that a lot from kids. They say, I don't know what it is, but I just don't feel right. I just don't feel right could mean a lot. And that individual might look like everything is okay, but they might truly be in a crisis. So the subjective reaction to a stressful life experience that comprises the individual's stability and ability to cope or function. So even though someone is functioning on a regular basis, they look fine, something is not okay. So they might snap quicker. A mom might say to a child, could you pick up your shirt? And the child just kind of blows their top, like, okay, why are you telling me to pick up my top? I know to pick up my top. So those are like subtle cues that parents kind of catch. And we're going to talk a little bit more about when parents kind of talk with their kids, respond to the kids. And by the time they get to us, they just say, oh yeah, she just started doing that today. And in the process of assessing, you start talking to the parent and she says, well, now that I think about it, this has been going on for about a month. And she just snaps, and she wasn't like that before. So it's paying attention to those small cues as we go along. So crisis defined, the main cause of a crisis is an intensive, stressful or traumatic event. Two conditions are necessary to define a crisis. So the individual's perception of the event as the cause of considerable upset or disruption. So what we think is not a crisis, to that individual might be a major crisis. Or we might see something and think, oh, well, that's not a big deal. I see that all the time. And as clinicians, we tend to do that because we've seen so many individuals present with the same thing so often that we kind of minimize, not intentionally, but because we've seen it so often. And for this individual, that little thing might be the last straw that breaks the camel's back, right? The individual's inability to resolve the disruption by previously used coping methods. So in the past, you say to the kid, hey, pick up your shirt. I'm going to stick to the shirt for some reason, but I think I'll change it up a bit. And the kid picks it up, no problem. And then this time, it's like they pick up the shirt, and it would not stop. They put the shirt away, come back to the dinner table, and it's like, why are you always yelling at me? Now I'm not hungry, I don't want to eat. And it just keeps building and building. And the mom is sitting there like, all I said was pick up your shirt. So by the time they show up at the crisis center to see us, and mom is like, all I said was pick up the shirt. And then we go in and speak to the child, and the child is like, every day this week, she's yelled at me. She wants me to do the dishes. She gave me more chores to do. And now the kid is like, I just can't cope. The more we talk, it comes out, yeah, there's this boy I like, and I saw that he's texting somebody else on Facebook. So the underlying issue was more about the boy, not mom. Mom was just the board to bounce off of. Yeah. Some warning signs of a mental health crisis include inability to cope with daily tasks, rapid mood swings, increased agitation, displays of abusive behavior, and I highlighted the information in parentheses in red, because most of the time when we talk about crises, we think about suicidality and we tend to focus more on suicidality. A lot of kids are aggressive to others, so they might attack other members of the family. We have kids that attack their parents, and we get a few of those like on a weekly basis at our facility. So, and I'm sure you guys get the same things. It's one of those situations where you have to look at, they're not saying they want to kill themselves, and they're not saying they want to kill anybody else, but they're attacking everybody they come in contact with. They're fighting in school. They're threatening to like jump someone or get into a situation where they fight. So those are pieces that we have to look at as well, finding out why that kid is acting that way. Losing touch with reality. And I had a kid come in the other day saying, I'm hearing voices. The voice is telling me to hurt myself. Last week, the voice told her to hurt herself and everybody else in the household. And going back to look at this kid, we want to make sure, okay, is this manipulation or isn't it? And as clinicians, that's always at the background of our minds. It's like some kids come in that we see so consistently that we say, well, oh, she says that all the time. It's a way to get somewhere or to get something from the family. And how do we look at a situation and see it as a true presentation of psychosis? So we have to be aware of the individual we're working with. There are some kids that come in and we don't know them, but we understand bizarre behavior. If parent is saying this kid has never done this before, there was a parent, I will use an example of one of the clients we saw, I think it was last month, and the mom came in, she was distressed. They were in our facility before 9 that morning, and she said, I don't know what to do. My daughter is 10, and she just came from the courts. She went to try and file incorrigibility. And she said she's been in therapy, she's getting medication, she's doing all these things. And the court said, well, you're doing everything you're supposed to do. Go to the crisis center. Maybe they can assess her, but we can't file incorrigibility right now. Because what we're going to try and do is enforce those things, which is therapy and medication, and she's doing those. So mom brings her in. And when I talked to her, I said, well, you're already getting services. She's not currently in active crisis, right? And mom said, you just don't understand. And she brought out her phone, and there was a video of her daughter the night before. Her hair was just out of whack. It was not combed. She looked disheveled, and she was on the bed just screaming. And the mom is like, I don't know what's going on with her. And she just started doing that a couple of weeks ago. So with the child's presentation, she looked to me like there was nothing going on. In that moment, that child did not look like she was in crisis. But after I talked with mom, saw the video, I was like, wow, I was really disturbed. And I brought the kid in. She couldn't remember what happened the night before. And mom said she had done that a couple of times before, even in school, and couldn't remember. That was how they started her on medication. So we ended up assessing that case as a true crisis in that moment, because there is a mental health crisis. Something is going on with this young lady, even though we couldn't explain it in that moment. So we had to we did a conference with a psychiatrist and get her into more intense services. And sometimes we have to do that, even though the presentation in the moment does not look like it's a crisis. But in the course of an assessment, you can kind of pull and rule out certain things. Okay, isolation from school, work, family, and friends. There's some kids that come in that are usually very friendly. They go out, they're very social. And within a few weeks, they stop socializing. They get home from school, go straight to their room and shut the door. And somebody knocks on the door, all you hear is, leave me alone. I'm fine. Nothing's wrong with me. And I don't know how to explain it, because I don't want people to think I'm crazy. And that we throw that around a lot. We throw those words around. And so for this young lady, something was going on with her. And she ended up going inpatient because she was truly suicidal. She had thoughts of just giving up. She's like, I'm done with this, and I'm not going to talk to anybody about it. Okay? And then on unexplained physical symptoms, younger children tend to present with more physical symptoms than adult kids. So my tummy's hurting. I don't want to go to school today. I have a headache. I don't want to go to school today. My leg hurts. There was a young girl that came into our center. She had been out of school for a few weeks. And when it was time to go back to school, because mom was ill, she got to school and just started screaming. She said her chest was hurting, her stomach was hurting, and the school called the mom because they were worried. Mom ended up taking her to the emergency room. They couldn't find anything wrong with her. And when she came to the crisis center and we talked to her, we found out that she had been in school for so long. Mom was seriously ill for those 3 or 4 weeks that she was out of school. And she was afraid something was going to happen to mom while she was at school. And it was that simple, but it presented as if something was truly wrong with her. Her mom is like, what if she has a heart condition? What if she has an ulcer? And mom was truly concerned, but this kid just had anxiety attacks, okay? So the clinician role, when confronted with a child in crisis, clinicians should address the child's distress, impairment, and instability by operating in a logical and orderly process. And most of the time people come in, we're like, okay, what's going on? We fill the paper, whatever way you work it at your different facilities. We have our process in place, and we know what questions we want to ask. But most of the time, we don't stop and look at what the need of that individual could be that's in front of us. So first, why are they presenting? We always ask the basic questions: suicidality, homicidality, other crises, other mental health crises. And when we ask about suicidality with kids, it's a little bit different. It's a little bit different depending on the age range. And we see kids as young as 4 years old at our facility. I don't know what age range you guys see at your different facilities. So how do we ask that question without planting the idea of the notion of, oh yeah, I want to kill myself. Yep, I thought about picking up a knife and killing myself. And they're saying that in the process, and you could tell they're thinking it as you're talking to them. And some kids will come in and just say, I don't want to be here anymore. And I talk a little bit about that later on. Clinicians should meet the child where the child is, assess level of risk, mobilize child's resources, and move strategically to stabilize the crisis and improve functioning. That's what we want to do when that individual presents to us in that moment. So when we're assessing level of risk, a kid comes in and say, you know what, I've been really sad, I don't know how to handle it, I just don't want to be here anymore, I want to die. So that's a mouthful. So the next question is, you want to die. We want to know why she wants to die, number one, but how are you thinking of doing that? So, and the ways that we ask it has to be open-ended. What are you thinking? Because if we make it too definite, then we're kind of giving them the option of saying, yeah, this is what I'm going to do. We're giving that idea of what the kid is thinking about doing or not thinking about doing, but we're planting ideas in that moment. So when we ask questions about suicidality and even homicidality, you have to make your question open-ended. You have to make it open-ended. So they will tell you several things. Most kids will give you several things that they will say. There was a young boy that said, well, I thought about hanging myself in my closet yesterday with my backpack. So as an adult, I'm looking at a 6-year-old, I'm like, in my head, can he truly hang himself with his backpack? He might tie it around hard enough where he starts to choke. It's possible. But is he able to do that? And to not trivialize it and kind of expand on that. So what made you think about that? What's going on? And it can lead to more detail. In the process of doing that, we could find out if this kid is truly serious about dying or just upset about something that's going on at home that we can help work with. So we can look at family, the problems, the issues going on at home, why this kid is upset and constantly saying, I want to die. And are there other family members involved that we could reach out to? Okay. Now, the clinician must conduct a swift but thorough assessment. At a minimum, this assessment should cover the child's home, school environment, stressors, medications, current use of alcohol or other drugs, and coping methods. And when we think about these individual situations, when we look at the home environment is totally different from the school environment. There are lots of kids that do very well at home, but at school, it's a totally different story. I actually met a parent this past week that said, this kid is perfect at home. She's a great kid. She's an AB student. And something happened in school. The school called her. And when she got to the office, they had a long list of things she did at school. She beat up kids at school. She'd go in the bathroom and stops other kids from coming in. She had so many write-ups at school that mom didn't know. And she came home with good grades, so mom thought nothing of it. When the school called, she's like, well, it's just probably another trivial thing. She's doing well in school. But this is a child that had been having issues in school for quite a while. So mom's situation now is, now I see I have to be more involved in school, even though she's a great kid at home. What's going on in school? And the kid is being bullied at school. She decides, okay, I'm going to be bullied, I'm going to start bullying other kids. And so she did it better than her bullies, right? But that's one of the situations with this young girl, is getting her more support at school and having someone to talk to while she's at school where she doesn't feel like she has to look out for herself. Okay? But we have a lot of kids that come in that say, hey, I smoke pot and I smoke every day. Most of the kids don't say I smoke every day. They say, I say, oh, once a week. And then when they present to Children's Hospital, they're like, yeah, they tested positive. And during the assessment, the kid says, oh yeah, I smoked a month ago. Or they tested positive for other substances. And it's looking again with those kind of kids, what's the issues behind or the underlying factors that's making them feel they need to use substances to feel better. What is going on in their minds? What is the process? Kids have said, I just can't get my mind to settle down. And when I take something, it makes me feel better. Or I can't talk to people normally, and when I use something, I can talk to my friends better. Okay. Clinicians must be cautious not to serve as a trigger for further crises. I've worked with quite a number of clinicians in my short years in the field, and I've kind of observed clinicians assessing children and adults. And one of the things I've noticed, our personality shows in how we assess. So if I'm usually someone that's quite reactive, that the slightest thing kind of gets me all nervous, when I go in to speak to a child that's in crisis or even in the family, if my nervousness presents, it's going to increase their anxiety. Because if I'm sitting in the room with a mom and a child and the mother said, yep, she's been cutting, we get that a lot. And the clinician's like, oh my God, She's cutting. Oh my goodness. Give me a minute. I have to go talk to my supervisor. You didn't sit to ask further questions. You got very anxious. And one of the clinicians that I spoke to recently, the child has been scratching with her fingernails. She said, I'm angry, I'm not getting my way, I want to die. And she sits there and says, see, and starts scratching her hand. And the clinician is like, oh my God, what if she scratches so deep that she kills herself? And I'm not going to giggle now because I giggled when she said that. But truly, this child is in front of you, she's in front of her parent. Excuse me, she's well supervised. She's not going to scratch her arms to the point where she dies. She's not going to scratch to death. Will she do other things? There's a possibility. And that's the piece we want to assess as clinicians. So we don't want to panic in the moment when we see those kind of presentations. We had a kid that really scared me to death, carved the word hate on her arm. And she used one of those pins that used to put stuff on the wall. And that really creeped me out. And the mom didn't bring her until a day later. And that to me was a big deal. But when I saw it, I was like, oh, okay, how'd you do that? And in my head, I was like, oh my God, she's gonna die because she's gonna have an infection. But it was all in my head. And I had to stay calm. That was a kid that needed to go somewhere for help in that moment. Mom said she's not been taking her medication. She's not been compliant. And then the ones mom thought she was compliant with, she found under her bed. She's been saving them in there. And I asked her why she was doing that. And she said, because I plan to take them when I have enough of them. So that's a situation that was a true crisis. So I wasn't as reactive to the cut, but the more that I talked with this young lady, I found out that this could end up being a true crisis beyond what was presented that looked superficial. Okay. One useful and rapid method of assessing the emotional, cognitive, and behavioral aspects of a crisis reaction is the triage assessment model. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. When we talk about the assessment model, you want to assess certain things when an individual presents to you, or I should say focus on the child. We want to assess lethality first and foremost. How serious is this kid about killing themselves? So not just about hurting themselves, but about killing themselves. Whether the child has actually initiated a suicide attempt. So we had a kid that went in the bathroom, locked herself in there. Mother and sister kept knocking on the door, and she didn't answer. They pushed the door down, and she had taken a whole bottle of her mother's medications in the bathroom. So they called 911 and took her to the hospital. So by the time they come to or call us in to come and assess, this kid was serious. And her thing was, I was just tired of talking. Nobody was listening. Nobody was listening. And we as adults, we do that. Even though we're clinicians, we're trained to listen for those factors that could lead to further crises. We're still functioning as adults, and here's a child in front of us. And the kids are like, I've told everybody, I'm tired of talking. I'm not saying anything anymore. We just had a kid on Tuesday do that. And he got there, he's like, I've been talking to everybody and I'm not going to talk anymore. So I told the clinician, well, sit with him for a while. Have everybody else out of the room and just sit. And then the next thing, she came out of the room and said, can I have a box of tissue? I was like, really? He's talking? She said, nope, he's just crying. I'm like, good. Go give him the tissue and just sit, continue to sit. And finally, he talked. It took longer, but that's okay. That's why we're there. It's to give them that support. And we have to slow down sometimes to get that necessary information to help divert a more fatal crisis, okay? Such as ingesting a poison or overdose of medication. If no suicide attempt is in progress, the clinician should inquire about the child's potential for self-harm or harm to others. So this kid is coming in saying, I want to kill everybody in my house and kill myself. Can this child truly carry that out? What are the means available to this child to carry this out? That's when you ask the question, are there any weapons in the home of the parent? When we talk to the parent, are there any weapons at home? Are they locked up? How easily accessible is the weapon? And if they're easily accessible, part of your safety plan is to get it out of the way, get it out of the house if at all possible. Medications. There are parents that just say, hey, in my house, I just leave my medication in the nightstand drawer. But most parents do that. But when we have a child that's threatening to kill themselves, not just hurt themselves, but to kill themselves, if they truly want to do it, they will find the means. So the things that are easily accessible that we all know are potential harm should be moved out of the way. How important is a safety plan? And how good and solid should a safety plan be? We can put in all those services on the side, but what form of supervision is there as well? And that's the biggest part of a safety plan when we put one together. When a kid is threatening to harm others around the home, what do? How are we able to stop them? We have a 13-year-old that attacks the other siblings in the home. And mom's thing is, I can't be there 24/7. I cannot be there 24/7. I have somebody there that helps to watch when I go to work. But when I come back, if I'm in the kitchen and they're in the living room watching television, all I hear is a scream. So what do? And some examples that I've given parents is like, well, she's 13. Get her to help. Keep her with you at all times. And most parents are like, well, she won't do anything. We'll start giving her little responsibilities. Don't make it seem like chores, because kids tend to think, yeah, you're just making me work. So you want to make it fun. And most of the time we think of it like, oh no, this is supposed to be a serious situation. It has to be serious. When it's serious, kids don't want to do it. Kids do not want to do it. So we have to find a fun way to make safety, we have to make safety fun, basically, is what I should say. So I wanted the kid that we had write a safety plan a couple of days ago. We sat down, we said, well, what did you do? He said, I thought of burning myself, like lighting myself on fire and burning myself. And so part of his safety plan, we did it with the foster mom and the foster care clinician, is first get rid of all lighters, access to any kind of flammable stuff, get it out of his way. And then we had him sit down and say, okay, if you were gonna write a plan that would help you feel safe, what would it be? This kid has been with a foster parent for over 2 years, and he heard in conversation that he was going to be moved out of that foster home. That was why he got angry. He said, I really didn't want to burn myself, but I was angry, and I'm still angry. So he got up, blocked all the toilets in the facility he was in, stuffed toilet paper in. He told them he was going to the toilet, put all that in there. And then he came back and sat down like nothing happened. And while in session, somebody called and said, yeah, we have a flood. And he said, and he came around and said, yeah, I did it. But this is why I did it. So when he was bored in crisis, all everybody heard was, I'm gonna set myself on fire in this house that you send me to. If you send me there, I'm gonna set it on fire. This kid didn't truly want to set anywhere on fire. He just didn't want to leave the home he'd known for 2 years. So as clinicians, how do we process that with this young man? How do we help him work through that change, which has to happen? There was no way around it. And the foster parent is saying, I love him, I don't want to lose him either. So how do we come together as a team working with this young man and help him deal with those feelings of anger? Okay. Asking about suicidal thoughts and feelings, and just when you say you can't take it anymore, what does that mean? I said that earlier. When we talk to young kids, and you don't just say, are you suicidal? I've had a young kid come in to say to me, I'm feeling suicidal, because I said, why are you here today? He said, I'm feeling suicidal. And I said, what does that mean? He's like, I don't know. And then I asked him again. I said, have you thought about hurting yourself? He's like, no. I'm like, okay. Have you thought about hurting other people? No. But they tell me that I'm suicidal. It's like, okay, that clears it up for me. So this young man just heard words. He heard everybody talking about him being suicidal because he's been kind of hurting himself and doing little things like making cuts. Even I wouldn't call them cuts. They're more scratches on his arms. And he was doing it out of curiosity. He was not trying to kill himself. He was not trying to kill anybody else. It didn't even occur to him. So, but this is a kid though. In the process of us getting him in to be screened for crisis, we've given him some ideas. So if a clinician does not experience, assesses this kid, and they end up saying, yep, he has several scratches and cuts on his arms, we should send him inpatient. He's going to go inpatient with the kids that have been inpatient several times, that have kind of learned the system of how to get in hospital. And then the next time he comes back, he's going to have some more to tell me about being suicidal. He's going to tell me something in his head is telling him to kill himself and everybody else that he comes across. So those are pieces as clinicians that we have to pay attention to. Every time a kid says, I think I want to die, or I feel like hurting myself, we should always take it seriously. So we should always take it seriously, but then process, assess, use the steps in the model and look at the lethality of what the child is saying. Estimating the strength of the child's psychological intent to inflict deadly harm. So a child who has just lost a primary caregiver with no other supports feel hopeless. That's a kid to be worried about. This kid might never have inflicted any kind of self-harm or self-injurious behaviors in the past. This kid might never have tried to hurt anybody else, but they show up and their mom just died. There's nobody else in the family that they were close to prior to mom passing away. Mom was the primary caregiver. And all of a sudden, this kid is quiet, this kid is not saying much, they're not eating, they're not social anymore. That's a kid to be seriously worried about, even though they've never presented in mental health crisis. But there's a situation in this kid's life at the moment that's making them think this way. I had a young lady that I assessed at Children's Hospital a few months back. When we got called in there, I went in, the kid said, I said, so what's going on? She was in the emergency room. She didn't want to talk. I put on the light, she said, could you turn that off, please? I'm like, okay. Would you like to talk to me? I don't care. So I pulled up a chair and sat next to her. So I'm like, wow, your hair is really pretty. And she said, thank you. And then she turned a little bit. She had her back to me. And she turned and I saw her nails. Her nails was real pretty. And I said, wow, that nail polish is really nice. She turned fully around, still laying down, and said, oh, thanks. My sister had that done for me. I'm like, wow, I'm getting in. I better stay on that track because I want to get to the point of why she's there or why I was called in there. And as we're talking, come to find, I never asked what the crisis was. We were just talking about social stuff. So are you in school? How are you doing in school? And she went as far as say, hey, yeah, I have a job. I work at Taco Bell. My mom has been sick. My mom was diagnosed with cancer last, I think she said September. And she had chemo, had radiation. By December, they thought everything was fine. And then come January, February, they said the cancer had spread all over her body. So they were at Carmano's getting treatment for mom. Her two sisters were there. And they were told that it didn't look like mom was going to make it. And so she went off at Carmano's. So they had to call security. And she said, I'm going to kill all of you guys. And I'm sick of you guys. I don't want to be here anymore. So she was brought to Children's, and we were called to assess. And after talking to her, I talked to the clinician and to our psychiatrist. I said, this is not a young lady that needs to go inpatient, irrespective of what she just said. This is a young lady in crisis because her mother is dying. That's her primary caregiver. Her father is not in her life. And all everybody heard was, she said she wants to kill herself and everybody else. Well, she said that, but is that truly the underlying factor? If we send her inpatient, we're taking her away a few more days from the mother that's dying. And that's going to be more distress for her. So what can we do to still keep her connected to her mother and kind of help her work through some of those, the feelings of grief that's already starting? How do we help her work through that process? So I talked to her, I said, have you ever been in therapy? She said, not really. I said, what do you think about talking to someone outside of your family that you can go see maybe once or twice a week while mom is ill to kind of help you process what's going on? She said, yeah, I like that because I can't stand my sisters. She said, they think they're the boss of me. And in my head, I'm like, yeah, they are, but. So it's one of those situations where this is a well-adjusted young woman that the whole family is in crisis. And she doesn't feel like she has the support. Oh, they're older. And all of them are like maybe 10 years older than her. She's the youngest child in the family. And mom is it for her. So I met with the sisters and kind of processed with them. And like, this is what you need to do for her. You need to make her feel safe. That when mom is not here, you're going to be here. So it was a big job for the whole family to try and get them in some kind of support. So gauging the lethality of a suicide plan. When a kid comes in and say, yep, I want to kill myself, and I know what I'm going to do. I know what I'm going to do. They might not always tell you what it is, but they tell you, I know what I'm going to do. So does the child have a crisis plan in place? And with our agency, we know that most of the kids we see, we do a crisis prevention plan when we see the kids. And we do it when the kid is not in crisis, when things are great. But we know they have a potential to go into crisis. So we come up with a plan with them and the parent. It's like, so if something happens at some point where there's, I'm trying to think of an example, fight at school or being bullied, something they've kind of mentioned during therapy, how would you deal with it? Let's come up with some plans on how to work through those things when they do happen so that we don't wait till while they're in crisis to kind of try to develop a crisis plan or to try to work out a safety plan. If they have a crisis plan in place, you're being proactive. And if you're not there, somebody else can go through that and process it with them. Like, remember when you met with Linda? You guys talked about doing this. Have you tried that? And when kids present to us, if they're open to our agency, we can pull up their crisis plan and look at what the crisis plan says. And we'll sit with the mom and the child and say, oh, wow, you guys talked about this before. And we've been able to de-escalate some kids using the plan they came up with before they were in crisis. They're like, oh, yeah, I didn't do that. Yeah, I didn't get a chance to go listen to my music or sit in my room. There's a kid that likes to walk. He said, yeah, I didn't get to do that. And I asked mom, why didn't you let him take a walk? She said, because I was worried that if he walked out, he wouldn't come back. So then we focused on that when they came in. So why wouldn't he have come back? Why didn't you want to come back? What's going on? She was yelling, there's too many people at the house. I just didn't want to be there. I don't want to come back home yet. So in the process of assessing or gauging, we could get a lot of information that we might leave out. If we're rushing to judgment and say, yep, he came in saying he's going to kill himself, he needs to go inpatient. Or we need to put him in a facility instead. He can't go back home. Home might be the best place for him. And there are a lot of instances where home is not the best place. But one of the most important things we want to do is we want to kind of help our kids learn that home is a place where we learn to adapt. We have issues that happen at home. Going away to the hospital or to another facility is temporary. You're going to come back home to the same thing. I don't know if there's some of you that have worked with adults that are addicted, that go into treatment, and then they're in a treatment facility for 30 days and go back home to the same environment. What usually happens is they fall back off the wagon, right? They go back to using because they're going back to the same situation at home. If we help them in their own environment, kind of process what's going on there, give them the support they need in that home environment, it might be easier to cope with the next crisis when it presents. So if they talk about using something to hurt themselves, what is the plan? Is it feasible? The young man that said he was going to strangle himself with his backpack was the same kid that went to school the next day and started kind of putting his neck on the back of the chair And the school sent him back to the crisis center and said, yeah, he wants to kill himself. He's trying to kill himself. And then while he was at the crisis care center, he was doing this. And there were 4 adults in the room, and everybody was holding him. Don't do that. Oh my God, he's going to hurt himself. So I go in the room. I said, what are you guys doing? He's trying to strangle himself. I'm like, seriously? Leave him alone. Back off. Step back. And everybody have a seat. He's fine. And he said, I'm going to do it. I'm like, okay. And I just stood there and watched him. And after a while, he stopped. And my conversation with our clinician that was in the room as well was, try to choke yourself. Just put your hands around your neck and see how successful you'll be. I said, as big as we are and as big as hands we have, I can try it. I don't think we can do it. I can have all of you guys try it and see if you really can. Or start scratching yourself real deep on your wrist with your fingernails. See how deep you can truly go before you're like, ow, the pain. So there's certain things that we see that kids present with that our reaction sometimes escalates the situation more than what it needs to be. So the time we can focus on redirecting energy and redirecting our focus, we tend to focus it on dealing with that presentation in the moment. And we want to avoid doing that. And I'd already talked about the kid having access to means of self-harm, such as drugs or firearms. So we want to make sure we address that. That's one of the primary pieces when you work with kids that you know are true risks of carrying out a threat. There has to be a lot of work with the adult in the home. You have to know the environment. If you're a home-based clinician, you want to assess the home environment when you go in there. Because you can tell for yourself when the kids come in and they say, well, we don't have any weapons. But lots of people put knives on their kitchen, like have it decorative, or access to the drawers. Put a lock on that. If your kid in the past has attempted to hurt themselves by cutting with a knife, we have a kid that's used a kitchen knife. Those kind of things, when you go in and things you assess, if the history of the child you work with shows situations like that. So you're assessing the home while assessing the child you're working with as well. So you inquire about suicide history. There are lots of kids that come in and say, yep, I want to die, and I've taken pills before, and how long ago was it? What made you think that? When was the last time you were in the hospital? So key questions. There are some kids that have never ever thought about it. Like the young man that just said it because he heard the word. If a kid comes in, we have a young girl now that's gone into the hospital maybe about 4 or 5 times within the last month. Is this kid truly suicidal, or has it become a behavioral pattern? Is it an easier place to go to where all I get to do is hang out, there's no responsibilities, nobody is asking me to do anything, and there's a pool, and I get to go swimming, and people come to talk to me every hour. This was a young girl telling me this. And she tells me specifically where she wants to go. That was the other part that I really enjoyed. And she said, I went in the room, sat with her. She said, I'm letting you know right now, I'm not going back home. And there's only 2 places I'm going to go. And she told me the 2 places. I was like, wow, okay. That was all I said. And she looks at me. I said, okay, you could go back and sit in the room. I'll talk with Dad. And I said, Dad, she's not going to the hospital. She's going to be going back home with you. But this is the plan we're going to put in place at home. This is what we're going to do when you go back home with her. Well, what if she starts yelling again that she's going to kill everybody? I said, well, so far within the last 3 months that she's been threatening to kill somebody, she hasn't yet, and we're thankful for that. So we just want to make sure she doesn't have the means to truly do it. Because each time a kid that truly wants to get to the hospital doesn't get the chance, they up the ante. And they keep going. And our fear as clinicians is this might be the time when they are successful. So what can we put in place to at least reduce the likelihood of them being successful at attempting to hurt themselves? So when we talk about assessing children, for suicidal youth, an action plan can involve several elements. We want to remove the means, and we've talked about that. We negotiate safety. This is a time-limited arrangement during which the child would agree to maintain his or her own safety. I have kids that say, you know what, I don't think I can be safe. I don't feel that I can be safe if I go back home. So that's not enough for me to say, okay, I'm going to send this kid to the hospital. That means I have to come up with a plan with the supports around that child. So a kid comes in, says, I'm suicidal, I think of hurting myself, I don't have a plan, but I'm constantly thinking about it. And then I talk with the kid, they said, okay, whatever. Kids say whatever a lot, what's that about? And I said, okay, well, we're gonna send you back home. That is the point where when I say that, even though the kid is saying, I still don't feel safe, my plan is going to be more with the parent or the caregiver or the support in the home for that child. That means as a clinician, I have to do a lot of psychoeducation with that parent. And that's part of the process that will reduce the child's likelihood of representing for the same type of crisis over and over again. Most of the time, children hold on to what they know. And if what they know is when I'm in crisis today, if I yell loud enough that I'm going to kill myself or I want to die, I'm going to get to leave home. I'm not saying that's the case in every situation, but in most instances, we come across that, especially kids that have been through the system a lot. There's certain patterns of behavior that they tend to pick up. So as clinicians, how do we make sure we're assessing appropriately and getting them the right kind of support that they need? When we look at future linkages, are we working with the school that the kid is in? Or are we just focused in our agency and what happens in our agency? When would they leave our agency after being assessed or screened, do we call back and say, hey, how are things going? Have you gotten in touch with this agency? When was the last time you went to your appointment? Were you able to make it? Oh, you didn't make it? What's going on? How can I help facilitate that? When we have kids presenting crisis at our facility, we do a follow-up call every day. So they come in, someone that came in last night, later today, one of our care managers makes a phone call and say, hey, you guys were here yesterday, we're just following up to see how things are going. If they have an appointment, we remind them, don't forget you have an appointment later today or tomorrow at such and such a time. And that helps the family stay connected, because then they know, okay, somebody is truly looking out. So I better go to that appointment if they were thinking of not going. We've had a parent say, oh yeah, she's actually doing fine today, so we're not gonna go to the appointment. That's an opportunity for us to say, hey, you know what? This has happened 3-4 times. It might help this time if you go, at least give it a couple of sessions and see what happens. I had a parent show up at our office at about 5:45. She had a 6 p.m. therapy appointment. And so when she came in, the clinician came to me and said, Ann, I don't think this is a crisis, but can you talk to the mom? So I went into the mom. I said, well, what's going on? She said, I don't like my clinician. I don't understand what work she's doing with my son, and I'm not going back there. So I said to her, have you met the clinician? She said, nope. She's new. They've changed his clinician 2 or 3 times, and I'm just sick of it. And I said, okay, I hear you. How about you do me a favor? Go today, meet the clinician. If your son does not like her, call me back, or I'll call you tomorrow and see how things go. She said, well, what if I don't like her? I said, well, let's see how your son feels about her. And then we'll work on it from there. She never called back. She went to the session, and she's continued to go to the session because her son actually connected with the clinician. She just didn't like the way the clinician sounded on the phone. And my joke to her is, I have an accent. When you talk to me on the phone sometimes, you probably wouldn't understand what I'm saying and won't want to come to see me. I'm like, I'm a really sweet person in person. But my excitement is that she went to the next building, went to the session, and we called her back. I called her back, said, so how things going? She said, oh, it's all right. He likes her. They're working together. So I'm like, good. That's what I wanted to hear. Okay. We want to decrease the anxiety and sleep loss. So if there's a situation where the kid is not sleeping, the parent is saying something is going on with the kid, or he goes to sleep and wakes up, I come out and he's up watching TV, or I can hear him in his room. Those are things that we kind of have to pay attention to. We have to start paying attention. This kid is in therapy, is getting everything. Do we need to do a psychiatric referral and assess to see if this kid needs to be on some medication to help support him? And there are lots of parents that say, hey, I don't want my kid on medication. But there's also instances where you're saying you don't, but that might be the last piece needed to help stabilize him fully. So we do a lot of psychoeducation in our facility when it comes, because we always joke like, I thought we're only supposed to deal with crises that come in now, not everything else. But we have parents come in and say, oh my God, he's just been tearing up the house. And then when we get into the medication piece, she's like, yeah, he was on medication for 3 months, but I didn't like how it was making him feel, so I just stopped it. Did you call the psychiatrist? No. Did you try to go back to the psychiatrist? No. I just didn't have the time. It's not working, so we just stopped using it. So those are pieces that we have to look at and kind of explore with that family and do a lot of psychoeducation, the importance of the medication, why the kid is on medication. And we have kids that come in, the parent says, hey, you know what, I think the medication is making my child feel funny. I always say, yeah, I wish I had that degree, but I don't have it yet. I might have to do it. But we need to call the psychiatrist. We need to get you an appointment. When is your next appointment? Have you called to let them know that your kid is feeling this way every time they take the medication? And hospitalization is a necessary last resort intervention. If risk remains unabated and the child is unable to contract for his or her own safety. And we have instances like that we cannot help. That we know this is going to escalate to a totally different level if we don't send this kid inpatient. And that being said, I have a child that we've been working with, like I said, has been in the hospital 4 or 5 times within the last month. And this is a kid that came in yesterday and said to me, these are the 2 places I'm going, and I'm not going home. And this kid has been screened 4 times in the last week. So in that kind of an instance, as a screener, when I go in to see this kid, I have the chart, I've seen this kid, and the kid presents again saying the same things they said a couple of days ago. As a clinician and a screener, how do I weed out all the other stuff and kind of assess for true lethality with this young lady? So this is a kid that I observed for over 5 hours, the day that she supposedly said she's going to kill herself. And she hung out. She was having fun waiting for the ambulance to get there. She was in the waiting room playing with her family. She was chasing them around the room, farting and making noises. She asked for food. She ate several times while she was waiting. When the ambulance got there, she was very excited to get on the gurney. So those are some of the things as clinicians that we observe. Is that kid truly suicidal? I'm not saying there's not something going on with her. I'm sure there's something else going on. I'm sure this child is in a form of mental health crisis. But is the hospital the place where that crisis will be resolved? The type of crisis she's presenting with. Do we need to look at how we're providing services to this child? Do we need to give additional supports in the home to support the family? Do we need to keep her more engaged? When she had supports in the home, she did great for a year. So that's what we need to tap into. What happened? Look at the history. When she was at her best while in services, what were we doing as an agency? But we forget to do that. We get wrapped up in the moment, in how that child is presented in the moment, and we forget to go back and get history. If I look in our history and it's like, okay, she left our agency 2 years ago, but she went to another agency, I would speak to the parent, tell me where you went. I would even go as far as to connect with that prior agency, with the parent's consent, of course, find out what they did, what worked for them. That's why we're a community agency. We're supposed to work together, especially with the children we have. They go to different agencies. Most of us have probably connected with a lot of the kids we've seen. There's a connection there. So we need to maintain that contact. Say, hey, you guys worked with this family 2 years ago. What happened? Is there any information you have that can help serve them now without saying, oh, they're trying to steal my client? I don't want them to steal my client. Because it's about the client. It's about the client and the success in treatment for that client. So hospitalization, I'm going to go back to that, is always a last resort. I've had people call me and say, yep, this child needs to go inpatient before they even get to us. And then they get to us, we talk to the family, and the parent is like, she doesn't need to go to the hospital. It was a fight with the sibling, and that was what it was. And then the more we talk to the family, it's like, no. By the time they got to the facility they went to, they were still very angry. So if we get there an hour later, or even if they get to our facility, they're there 30 minutes, it changes. That's how we kind of separate some of the seriousness of some presentation from others. We had a family that was at Children's for a while. So the kid was there. By the time they called them in through the emergency room, medically cleared the kid. The kid was like, look, I'm not suicidal anymore. I want to go home. And we have instances where that happens. But we still go in and we still do the assessment and find out for real that are they going to go home and go do something, or are they truly feeling better? Okay. Sometimes crisis is a part of life, but it's how the crisis is managed that determines how the individuals will respond and cope with the crisis. Emotional regulation, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about, dialectical behavior therapy, which we don't use as much, but it's one of the areas where emotional regulation is addressed. It teaches the person to learn new skills when responding to intense emotions. It also stresses that the individual learn how to respond proactively rather than reactively. And a lot of crisis situations are reactive responses or reactions to situations that we're in. When we talk about adults, we do it. So think about a child that still doesn't have all of the processing skills that adults have. And the presenting situations, we have moments as adults that you want to go in your room and just scream into a pillow. And I know some of you have done it before, probably several times a day, depending on what's going on. Or when you drive in your car after work and you're going through some of the stuff that happened and you start talking to yourself. Yeah. I had a moment the other day in the office where I was talking to someone on the phone and I was so upset with them. And I said, yeah, could you hold on a minute? And I put them on hold. And I'm like, what in heaven's name? And I'm trying not to cuss. And so I had all this personal conversation, and I didn't know a colleague was in the other spot in the office listening. And I picked up the phone again and said, yeah, hello, and just continued with the conversation. So we have those moments. So kids just carry those moments through differently. So if that was a kid that was experiencing what I was experiencing, they'll probably tear up the space they're in, start kicking things, because that was truly what my inner child wanted to do. It was like punch the table, throw things off the table, lay on the ground and throw a big tantrum. But I did not do that. So when we think about kids, when we're assessing some of the things going on with them, the presentation is so extreme that is how they know how to handle it, because that's the age they're in. Now, we have some adults that do that too now. So, and I know some of you probably do. You don't want to admit it now, but at the end of the session, we could talk more about it. It is also prudent to let the person who is struggling know that crisis is an acute situation that triggers an increase in intense emotional response, and that solutions are available. So we don't want to minimize what an individual is going through, but at the same time, we want to let them know that it's going to pass. But how do we do that without sounding like we're patronizing that person? So it's finding an effective and efficient way to talk with someone in crisis and kind of let them know that this is happening in the moment and it's not going to go on forever. And how do you communicate that to a kid? Because to a kid, one situation is huge. I know my kids say, you always do that. You always say that. I'm like, seriously, I just asked you to like take the trash out today. There are kids that my son says all the time, every Thursday, put the trash out. And once a week, he'll get it right. The following 2 Thursdays, I have to remind him. And he's like, Mom, you do not have to remind me. I know. And then I come out in the morning and the trash is still in the garage. And then when he reports it, though, to him, he's like, I always do it. I always do it. And you always do that. And oh my God, what is that with kids? It's whatever and oh my God. And they say with the neck thing. So I mentioned dialectical behavior therapy. I know a lot of agencies use cognitive behavioral therapy. How many agencies or individuals do I have here that have worked with DBT? For individuals in crisis, borderline personality disorder? Okay, a couple of people. Cognitive behavioral therapy is awesome. It works great. All of us that are trained in the field, no matter what our individual fields are, have that training. And we understand how to use it. We understand how to put the processes together. We use it in psychotherapy. In the last few years, it's being used more and more when we talk about kids that have gone through trauma or any kind of trauma. But one of the reasons that I put dialectical behavior therapy up here is I've worked for a number of years with individuals with borderline personality disorder and people that are truly suicidal. Because the difference between CBT and DBT is that DBT actually focuses more on the presenting behavior rather than the cognitive aspect of it. Both of them kind of have a combination of some of the modalities behind it. So when we talk about DBT, this is a therapeutic model that was developed for people who are frequently in a state of crisis. We have some families that just constantly, they will present every week in a form of crisis. So we want to look at what's going on with that family, what's going on in the environment. How can we help them change some of those things that are going on? So there's a young lady that every time, let's say her schedule changes, she goes into crisis. And she spirals from, oh my God, my appointment, why did they change my appointment? Are they trying to stop seeing me? To I want to die? To she can't stop thinking about dying and ways to die. And so it became more about working with her on looking at how do we regulate that emotion that you feel the moment somebody says to you, your schedule has changed. What can we do? What alternatives can we have in place for that person? Not necessarily about the thinking yet, because kids most of the time don't think through things. Even when we tell them, the way they think it is totally different. The way they process what they hear is different. So when we sit and kind of listen through and kind of work through it, it's like, okay, this is what you do every time. You go from, my head is hurting, I think I'm going to die, I'm having a heart attack, oh my God, get me to the hospital. So what things can you do when that happens will be the focus. So with DBT, that's what DBT looks at. It's more of the behavior before kind of jumping onto the cognitive aspect of it. We want to kind of hit all the areas, but with children, can we address that behavior? The young lady that's presented the last 4 times trying to get to the hospital, how can I work with that child using the dialectical behavioral treatment approach? Because I know her thought process is not going to play in. We've attempted that, it's not working. So let's look at the behavior. You're coming in saying this voice is telling you to kill yourself. Okay, I hear you. When the voice talks to you, what can you say? What can you say to the voice? What can you do? How do you respond to it? What is it saying to you? So let's come up with some responses that the conversation you can have with the voice, right? Because based on how many times this child is already presented, we know that the voice is telling her the same thing every time. And she's getting a reaction every time that she said it. So yesterday, we changed up the game. I said, you're not going to go to those two places. Let's talk with a voice and see what he thinks about it. Well, he's saying, I'm not going to be safe at home. Okay. What if we have dad there? And we have a phone, you can call this person when the voice is talking to you. And you guys can kind of process what the voice is saying. She said, okay, that might work. I said, okay, how about we try that tonight? And tomorrow morning, we talk again. And she said, okay, I can try that. So I didn't focus on her thinking. I didn't give her an assignment to think through, because it's all internal. And for a child that's in crisis, if we focus on what is in here, they're going to spiral into further crisis. It's like, how about we just focus on what you can hear and see? What is in the here and now? Let's focus on that. And in most instances, you'll get more of a positive outcome. It might take longer because it's a long process. CBT, when we use cognitive behavioral therapy, it's shorter term, we'll get quicker responses. There's enough evidence showing that it works, and it truly works. But when it comes to consistent crisis, people that consistently present in the same type of crisis, how do we manage it? How do we manage it, and how do we help them process it? So in conclusion, the goal of crisis intervention is to lessen the intensity, duration, and presence of a crisis that is perceived as overwhelming and that can lead to self-injurious behaviors to harm to others and to themselves. This is accomplished by shifting the focus from an emergency that is life-threatening to a plan of action that is understandable and perceived as doable. So when we sit to do a safety plan with a family, we're not going from our situation. We're not going from our understanding of what a home environment should be, because we're coming from our frame of mind, our frame of function. We want to come from this family that's presenting. What is their home environment like? What is the family environment like? What is going on? Always get as much background information as possible, because it kind of helps you come up with a good plan. And a plan that's not, I wouldn't say good, but a workable plan for that family. And the most important thing is we want to keep them safe from one moment to the next, till they come to their next appointment. So when somebody calls today and say, hey, we have people that call on the phone. I had a parent that called and said, my kid is tearing up the house. I have 3 younger kids. I cannot bring them to your facility. And I can't go to the hospital because I don't have anybody else to watch my other kids. This was about 10:30 at night. So we sat on the phone with the mom, processed things with her, stayed on the phone with her for about 30 minutes. And she said, oh, he went to sleep. I think we're going to be okay. So the following morning, we called her back when our office opened. How did things go? He totally calmed down. He's fine now. And she didn't have to come back in. We went in, looked at her chart, when is his next appointment, called the clinician and said, hey, this family called. There was a crisis last night. Could you get in touch with them and get them in earlier than you scheduled to see them? Sometimes we can work that out within the system. So that's our way as clinicians of being proactive rather than waiting till the family is in true crisis to say, hey, you know what? Yeah, it just happened. Oh my God, what are we gonna do? And we have clinicians running all the time. You guys will be amazed. Like, yeah, they just came in and we don't know what to do. I'm like, well, how long have you been working with this kid? How come you don't have a plan in place? Why are you panicking? If you're panicking, we might as well put the whole family in somewhere. Because you're supposed to be the facilitator of care for this family, right? And this is accomplished by shifting the focus from an emergency that is life-threatening to a plan of action that is understandable and perceived as doable. And the goal is to protect the individual from self-harm and harm to others. So it's really important that we kind of pay attention to that. Excuse me. So we did that right on time. So if you have any questions, please pass them along.
Oh, thank you. We do have a question from here at this site. What do you do in a crisis interview if the parent is escalating the situation?
That's a good one. One of the things that I kind of direct the clinicians in our department to do, when a family presents, we have two individuals that kind of meet the family. So the first person is the care manager. They go and talk to the parent by themselves. What's going on? What brought you here today? Or why did you bring your child in? And when the clinician comes out, the clinician is going directly to speak to the kid alone. That's been very successful for us. Because most instances, and what I've kind of been working with our clinicians when I started working there, is when families walk in, watch the nonverbals. Watch the nonverbals. If the kid walks in first, head down. I've had kids with the hoodie thing. That's the third thing. So I've done the whatever, oh God, and then the hoodie over the head. And they're not looking at their parent. So as a clinician, you want to observe that. You don't want to bring both the child and the parent in together, because the issue might be between the parent and the child. So we want to talk to the parent, we want to talk to the child. At some point, we bring them together, but we want to make sure we don't pull them in together and escalate a situation that's already escalated. And so that's one of the ways we handle it. We had a situation where the parent went into crisis while we were trying to assess the kid, and then the kid ended up in further crisis based on the parent. And that was an instance where we did not separate. The kid heard all the stuff the mother is saying, and the kid just went off, and we could not de-escalate that child. So in instances, I've stopped parents, I've stopped an interview and just said, ma'am, can I talk with you by yourself for a minute? Or can you go have a sit while I talk to Jane by herself? Give me a few minutes, I'll come back and get you, I promise. And it's just stop the session. Stop the session in that moment and kind of change the dynamics. But always separate them if it's a kid that you can understand.
Thank you. We're going to check in with Children's Center and see if there are any questions there.
Okay.
No questions here, ma'am.
Okay, we'll check in with Community Living Services.
Experience. For example, completing a safety plan when a child that witnessed a homicide.
That's one of the toughest assessments to make. So when you come in, it has to be in the immediate. And we've had situations like that where the parent come in and said the child saw I don't know if it was the mother or the father, that got shot in front of the kid. And the kid came in. The first question is, so what happened at home? It happened they came in about 3 or 4 days after the incident happened. And he said, my parent died. I can't remember now which parent it was. And I said, wow, that's got to be hard. And tell me what happened. So the kid went in and told the story and said, yeah, but I'm fine. I'm a little bit upset. This was a 7-year-old kid. So in that kind of a situation, the kid didn't have the true understanding of what happened. And it's going in and kind of exploring the grief process in a brief way. There's a trauma-focused cognitive behavioral form of therapy that's out there that I think is awesome. And it gives you a step-by-step process to follow. And one of the caution I threw out to our clinician when we dealt with that kid is in the moment of assessing, you don't want to trigger or further traumatize this child. So how do we question appropriately? What are the adults in the home saying? And one of the things we did in that situation was pull the parent and the aunt and a couple of the other families. There were 3 family members that came with this kid. How are you guys processing this as a family? Are you talking about how you're feeling and all of the distress in front of the child? How can you help him process through that? And getting the whole family in therapy and how to deal with it. Most of the time, younger kids take longer to understand death. They deal more with the absence of the person. And we have to come up with ways to help them deal with that absence. This person is not there. This is what we used to do. How about focusing on those great, wonderful things that you and that person did? And kind of doing more of that with your uncle or your aunt. So we maintain that continuity for them while helping them process the absence of that person in their lives.
Thank you. We're going to check in with Lincoln Behavioral Services next.
No questions here.
Okay, we'll check in with Northeast Guidance Center.
No questions at this time.
Okay, we have a final question from here at the Guidance Center. How old are the children you generally work with, and do they generally have drug problems?
We actually see kids from, we'll say 0 to 17 or up to 18. So we don't see 18-year-olds typically. The younger kids, we don't see the drug issues. So when I say younger kids, we've had a 10, 11-year-old that tested positive for drugs that have, they say, oh, yeah, I smoke every day. One kid says, I drink when I have a drink. I'm like, you're 11. But a lot of the older teenage kids, we see a lot of marijuana use with those age group. And I had a 5-year-old, we screened 5-year-olds, and one of the ones that came in, I ended up saying that this is not a screen. He had no teeth. He was the cutest little boy. And I asked him, why are you here today? He said, because I'm crazy. And I said, okay, you don't look crazy to me, but what does crazy look like? And we have this chart in the office that we use. And he picked one that had anxiety. And I don't know who drew those pictures, but that really looked like someone that stuck their finger in an electric outlet. So he picked that one as what he thought he was for the day. And all he said, he has a 14-year-old brother that sings a rap song that talks about going to the graveyard and doing something. It was some rap thing. So he said it in school. And the school is like, oh my God, he's suicidal. He's talking about dying and going to the graveside. And so that was the interpretation from the school. So that 5-year-old was not in crisis. The adults thought it was because he kept singing the same song over and over again. So depending on the kid, we attempt not to make generalizations. So when kids come in and say, oh, I have stuff crawling all over me, I see things, we quickly assume that, oh, they must be on something. And most of the time they're not, but in other instances, we have quite a few that are.
Thank you. We've received an additional question from Children's Center, but before we take that, I do want to remind people one more time to please fill out your electronic evals later today. Tiffany, what's your question?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. As a school social worker, time is limited, especially with 900 students sometimes. Are you suggesting we stop referring students?
Not at all. Not at all. I know one of the most important things we talk about is when kids are referred, what are they being referred for? So as a therapist, if a child presents to me that the child is saying they want to go to the graveyard, was there any kind of initial assessment done with that kid? Did the clinician sit and even ask some questions of the kid and what's going on in the classroom before they're referred? So in most of the instances that we get is that the child said something in class, they went and talked to the social worker, not necessarily the school-based clinician now, but the school social worker, and they said, oh, that's what he said? Well, send him to the crisis center or send him to the hospital. And then by the time they get there, the kid was not really saying, had no intent. The kid was saying something that had no context to suicidality at all. So if someone had talked to the kid before being sent out, it would kind of alleviate some of the issues of sending them out and creating a crisis where there isn't one.
Thank you. And have received another question from the Guidance Center. Is there a resource for DBT for borderline personality disorder?
Yes, there's a ton of resources for borderline personality disorders, and I can forward that information and have them forward it to you if you want to leave your information. But there's specifically for borderline personality disorders, there's a lot.
Well, thank you, Anna. On behalf of the Detroit Wayne Mental Health Authority, we want to thank you for coming out to share your expertise with us this morning.
Thank you very much. Thank you.